So we are going to move on to our next short panel, and this is going to be with Zhang, Caitlin Chin, and Anissa Rashid who will introduce the next session on help and harm, computers trained to act like humans. So I'll turn it over to Anissa.
Hi, yes, I'm having trouble starting my video, but hi, I'm Anissa. I'm a senior studying data science, economics, and design. And I'm very excited to present Help and Harm, Computers Trained to Act Like Humans. We have two great speakers. First, we have Zhang, who's a co-founder of Rulai and a professor at UC Santa Cruz. And we'll be presenting about building virtual assistants for companies. And next we'll have Caitlin Chin, a research analyst at the Brookings Institution. And she will present her findings on the social effects of gendered voice assistants. And then I'll be returning at the end to ask a few questions on behalf of students and attendees. But let's just get started. Yi, if you want to go ahead with your presentation.
Sure, can someone let me present? Okay, good, thank you. I prepared some slides to share with you about our experience of deploying virtual assistant. As we all know, conversation AI systems has been ever increasingly popular in our daily life, and from the Google Assistant to Alexa and to Siri. And for me, I'm more focusing on the enterprise field, right? Because the virtual assistant also have a big impact and a potential in business, and more like acting like a digital AI workers for companies. I founded Rulai, a conversation AI platform to help enterprise build virtual assistants. We have built a virtual assistant and deployed a virtual assistant in various verticals such as pharma, retail, insurance, financial, automobile, high tech, and etc. Those virtual assistants has been deployed in different business units for different use cases. For example, in sales and marketing, the virtual assistants can improve conversion rates, drive higher revenue for the company, and lower customer churn for the company. The virtual assistants can manage sales funnel, gather data, nurture needs for the sales leads, and also provide personalized product services like product recommendation, promotion, and so on for the customers. And the virtual assistant as AI workers has also been deployed in customer service. They can actually drive dramatic improvement in operational efficiency, get a better customer experience, and reduce cost if you do it right. They can help customer check, for example, order status, make changes to the order, support customer onboarding and troubleshooting, and also manage the loyalty programs such as registration or award tracking with virtual assistants. And customer can easily dispute a charge and get accounting information through the digital workers. The virtual assistant can also support employees for the company to improve employee productivity, lower employee support cost, and improve employee experience. For example, virtual assistant has been deployed in IT help desk to help managing incidents and troubleshooting. They have been deployed in HR to help recruiting and employee onboarding, and they can also support the company's digital workspace in general. So there are a lot of good things bots can do, and I have been involved in many companies helping them deploy their virtual assistants as digital AI workers. However, on the other hand, there are also risks if you do not build the bot correctly. So I'm a professor, I'm also writing papers. If you go from the industry, go to the research community, look at the literature, you will see a lot of research papers about machine learning AI for virtual assistant. It's about how to learn from data, like end-to-end, the popular topic are end-to-end deep learning based for virtual assistant based on data. Right? And if you look at the research literature in AI, it sounds like big data is the key and machine learning is the key. However, there are quite some risks if we actually build virtual assistant only from data without human control. And the virtual assistant can learn undesirable behaviors from the data because some data are very bad. and they can have biased answers learned from poor, bad customer service representatives. They could have toxic or harmful languages, right? Also in critical safety-related issues like medical advices, or for example, COVID-19 time, people asking for health-related issues to virtual assistant, and it could be very dangerous if the virtual assistant is only learned from data. And also, a virtual assistant can have a risk when facing adversary attacks. For example, they might leak out personal information because a virtual assistant actually has access to a lot of information. There are privacy and security potential risks. And the virtual assistant can also take actions, for example, changing accounts, do some financial transactions, and they could be misled and taking actions with bad consequences. And because of those risks, that's why, although in research literature, for example, in AI machine learning literature, you see a lot of research on end-to-end deep learning based models for virtual assistant, but in practice, when we deploy virtual assistants for companies, human always actually control the virtual assistant. We have never done end-to-end virtual assistant learned only from the data. And in practice, what we do, we actually have a systematic methodology to develop a virtual assistant, like we develop other other systems. At the first, we do strategy and analysis to figure out who is the user, what are their needs, because know the user and model the user, their needs, their goal, and their values are very important and help to control the virtual assistant. And we can know how bots will be used, what are the use cases and the tasks. And then later stage, we will come to design the bot, match what kind of use cases scenario this bot can serve the customer better, serve the user better, like the conversation of the bot, design the conversation of the bot, design the interface interactions of the bot. If you have multi-modality bot, how to design different identity modalities are also need to be considered. Okay. And then we will come to really build the bot and systematically test and evaluate the bot to make sure it fits users' needs and deploy the bot. So this kind of bot development methodology is what we do in practice, and which is very different from what a research paper usually describe when they come to machine learning only trained bot. Another thing that might be relevant to this panel is the bot personality, which is a thing we care a lot when we design the bot, because people naturally will personify objects, especially if they are interacting with them, especially if it's a virtual assistant. And that's why when we deploy virtual assistant, we would usually advise either way or the company who use our platform to build a virtual assistant need to define a personality for the virtual assistant so that you can control the bot, keep the personality of the bot consistent for all the use cases, for all the customer interactions, and then craft the response of the chatbot, the virtual assistant based on the personality. And those personality design in practice are usually brand guided. There are brand guided voice and tones. I have seen companies who intentionally choose gender neutral personality. I also have seen more cases where companies choose female persona, choose female. But in certain verticals, we do see company intentionally choose men as the virtual assistant persona. Right? There are different choices, but normally it's fitting the company's branding. Right? And also there are cases where personality can mimic that of the target user and adapt to the context of use. Right? And when designing the bot, there is also often a discussion about the emotion. For example, like should the bot express and have emotion, right? Because having emotion helps the bot seem more natural and human-like, but it can also raise expectations of seem fake, right? Because humans usually know it's bot, why you feel happy. Right? And bot actually can still display empathy empathy as a proxy for the company it represents. So even if you define the bot don't express emotion, it can also evoke emotion without expressing its own. So there could be emotion involved in the conversation, although you design the bot don't have emotion. So, and the last piece I want to mention is because we work with many companies about their virtual assistants, and we actually have bot design guidance. Here are some of the high-level examples of guidance we provide. One important is be upfront about using a bot, because transparency, we feel transparency is important, because customers value transparency as a means to build a trust with the company behind the AI virtual assistant. When users think the virtual assistant is human, they have different expectations. The bot would need to meet the broader expectation of a human, which will be a challenge. And besides, the bot is not perfect, and many companies we work with actually has an escalation path. When the bot cannot solve a problem, they will escalate to real human. And if the bot pretend to be a human, then escalation will seem weird. Right? And when user or human know they are interacting with the bot, they know the limitation of the bot, usually narrowly defined purposes, they will automatically adjust to their behavior and expectations and make the experience smoother. So that's in general, in practice, at least at the current stage, we advise companies to be upfront about using bot. Okay, that's all I want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yi. Now I'd love to hand it over to Caitlin to discuss more about her research on these gendered bots.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anissa, and thanks to Yi for kicking things off. And Yi, I definitely learned a lot from your talk about voice assistants, because I've also done some recent work on voice assistants, but in a different context. So I work at the Brookings Institution, which is a public policy think tank, which means that we take a look at technology issues through a public policy lens. And recently I co-authored a report with one of my colleagues, Michela Robison, where we take a look at some of the gender and inclusivity issues surrounding the rise of automated bots, such as voice assistants. And our research was actually inspired in part by a book called The Future of Work, which was written by one of my other colleagues, Daryl West. And The Future of Work describes how technology is changing the labor market. And one point that really caught our attention was how the use of robots was expanding around the world. The book highlights examples how artificial robots are currently being used in the service industry or in customer-facing roles, including nanny robots in China, robots at a hotel in Japan that take reservations and speak Japanese and English, a security guard robot named Steve in the Washington Harbor, or Aristotle, a robot with a woman's voice that reads bedtime stories to babies, even social robots that can pick up groceries and keep people company. So automation and robots are topics that have fascinated many policy researchers. It's a topic that I hear a lot about here in DC. But this issue has primarily been examined through an economic and political lens. However, my co-author, Michela, and I decided to instead research issues of gender and inclusivity. As you mentioned, companies often humanize bots, whether by adding personalities, and to some degree that makes sense because there is some evidence that people like using products that they relate to. And I'm sure as branches of AI like natural language processing and emotion AI advance, these digital tools have the ability to become even more human-like and realistic in the future. So therefore, it is crucial to consider how bots depict gender and existing gender job stereotypes, especially since some of the largest gender gaps that we see today are in the workforce. Voice assistants and virtual assistants are so widespread at the moment, and they're being used in so many different contexts and sectors, just like he said. According to a 2016 Business Insider survey, 80% of businesses were either currently using chatbots or were interested in doing so at the time. Many of these voice assistants have gendered names, voices, appearances, or perhaps even personality traits, like you mentioned. And in addition to some of the examples that I know were in one of these slides, like Amazon's Alexa or Microsoft's Cortana. We also see examples like Bank of America's Erica or Autodesk's Ava. So So these are very common in countries around the world, and most of my work has focused more on the customer-facing virtual assistants and the implications of human interaction with them. So some of this work to, I think, address gender in artificial bots has already been started. There have been some academic articles and some research done on the topic of gender and AI, and companies have made some progress on these issues. But of course, there is still more progress to be made and still some questions left unanswered. I think one study that I really found fascinating was actually back in the 1990s, when Clifford Nass and Byron Reeves at Stanford found that individuals exhibited similar behaviors with TVs and computers as they did with other humans. So not only did they treat the machines politely, but they also interacted with male-sounding and female-sounding computer voices differently. And furthermore, these gendered voices alone were enough to elicit different behaviors from users, even when all other gender cues, such as appearance, were missing. And more recently, several analyses and reports have been published that focus specifically on US voice assistants like Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and Google Assistant, which are hugely popular and control over 92% of the US market share for smartphone assistants. And voice assistants have traditionally featured female-sounding voices, although some have undergone updates since their initial releases. UCLA professor Sophia Noble has recently described how the prominence of female-sounding voice assistants can function as socialization tools. And last year, the AI Institute released a report describing how algorithms can become a feedback loop based on the backgrounds and demographics of the developers who create them. So in our research at Brookings, my co-author Michelle and I argue that anytime we discuss the portrayal of gender in AI products, we need to take a look at the demographic composition of the teams that develop these products. And ultimately, as we know, there is a lack of diversity within the STEM pipeline and workforce where women, Black, Latina, LGBTQ+, individuals and others are underrepresented in engineering schools, software developer and computer hardware engineering positions, leadership positions in tech, and many other positions that are equally important to the development of virtual assistants. So these gaps are significant, especially when we consider that these are the teams that are designing human-like bots that often feature gender in some form. So we do acknowledge that voice technology is relatively new. I mean, Siri, Cortana, Alexa, and Google Assistant were first launched within the past decade. And in fact, there has been some positive progress on certain issues over the past few years. And one of these areas of progress is actually Silicon Valley's approach to gender-based harassment. Almost 4 years ago, in 2017, Leah Fessler, who is a reporter for Quartz, analyzed how Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and Google Assistant responded to sexual gender-based comments, and she found that these voice assistants were evasive, subservient, and sometimes even thankful. But when we replicated the same study in July 2020, we discovered that each of the four voice assistants had since been updated since Fessler's original 2017 article, and they now respond to harassment in a more negative manner. So this does reflect some positive progress in how tech companies address serious issues in voice assistants, but there is more work to be done. Progress in diversifying the teams who develop virtual assistants is something that's important, but also something that won't happen overnight and something we need to keep working toward. And furthermore, there are really no standards on how to address gender in virtual assistants. You know, when or if it's appropriate to humanize or engender AI, how to define voices that we might consider to be male or female, gender neutral, gender ambiguous, non-binary. So these are all questions that we need to be asking. And so to conclude my remarks, because I know we're short on time, discussions of gender are definitely essential to creating socially beneficial AI. We need to normalize questioning gender representation of voice assistants and any other future AI products. So I'll turn things back over to Anissa, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great, thank you so much for both of your presentations. Just to get our discussion started, I wanted to ask Caitlin, what are some best practices and potential regulations you believe that companies should follow when creating and designing these virtual assistants?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And when researching voice assistants for our recent report, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the lack of consensus or guidelines on how companies should depict gender in human-like robots. When we talk to various people who work in this field, and this is an area where I think businesses could benefit from clarity. Any guidelines could be developed with input from academia, civil society, civil liberties groups. I think there are a lot of stakeholders who could be interested in this issue. And in addition to including guidance on, when or if it's appropriate to humanize virtual assistants, and how to develop and define voices that might be considered male or female, gender neutral, non-binary, gender ambiguous, and when each voice would be appropriate to use. I think we also need guidelines on how to define gender-based harassment in the context of automated bots or voice assistants, and how bots should respond if a human interacts with it in such a way. Furthermore, how to reach achievable metrics for accuracy and speech recognition and hold companies accountable for reducing those errors. Ways to promote active contributions from AI developers who reflect diverse populations. And I think finally, guidelines should also consider current social norms, especially when developing voice assistants to be deployed in multiple countries, and considering that different countries have different societal or cultural norms. So these are, I think, the short-term actions that companies can consider. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a way to build this in, or have you hold these actions in conjunction with Yi's chatbot methodology. But I do think that there are other things we need to do as well. We argue that companies should collect and publish data relating to gender and diversity in their products and teams. So how people interact with voice assistants based on their perceived gender. And we also describe how many different stakeholders, so universities, technology companies, other organizations, and the government can work together to address gender disparities in the workforce and in education, and especially in engineering positions. This is because societal norms aren't limited to AI companies. Research shows that people like these products, and these products ultimately reflect society. So trends in technology are something that we need to be thinking about both in the short term and in the long term.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I guess this leads into my next question. For Yi, what are the gaps that you have observed in the industry of creating these virtual assistants? And looking forward, what do you believe should be done in practice, kind of in response to Caitlin as well?
So there are quite several gaps, and as related to the discussion we have, what Caitlin just mentioned, right? She mentioned quite some best practice research results, and also mentioned potential regulations and guidances from the government and so on. And those are related to very important social issues and gender and bias, and also like culture for different companies and so on, very important issues. However, there are also potential gaps from those guidances, researches to how those things can really be implemented. Because if you look at the world, we are not talking about Google, Amazon, Facebook, because they have a lot of people, they have thousands of people behind their virtual assistant. They probably have enough resource to do those implementation, right? But here we are looking at hundreds of thousands of other companies, including small and medium business. They want to deploy virtual assistant to solve their business goal, right? To meet their solve the pain points they have in the business. For example, they might have thousands of customers waiting online for 1 hour in order to get a customer service representative. They want to solve that problem first. And they don't have enough resource to do the research and implement the best practice by themselves. They probably only have one person or half person in charge of virtual assistant, the design and building. So, and it's understandable especially for small and medium business, right? They need to focus on their immediate pain. And if they don't solve their immediate pain, don't launch the virtual assistant, or don't do, in general in business, if a lot of business don't have the luxury to wait for a solution to be perfect, right? They sometimes need to launch a solution to solve immediate pain points, solve a problem. Otherwise, the company will be dead. Right? And so I feel it will be very challenging for those hundreds of thousands of companies in like small, medium business to implement those best practice on this. We solve it together, right? And so those are important problems. And I see the value to fill the gap. And I actually think we should solve it together using an ecosystem way, not just say, here are the best practice, each company please implement those. Because a lot of companies cannot afford to do that. And in this ecosystem, I expect researchers like Kathleen and others will come with best practice suggestions, and there might be law enforcement proposals. Then technology vendors like Rulai and some other technology vendors for conversation AI can actually implement those as meta strategies in the platform. So the virtual assistant deployed on top of those platforms by default has those best practices already implemented in them. And then the individual company can customize or just use the default one, right? And or meanwhile, train students, train consulting companies to help solve the problem together.
Yeah, and in these last couple minutes here, I just wanted to ask a few more career-focused questions for both Yi and Caitlin. So for Caitlin first, just a short bit about what your journey was like getting involved with tech policy and privacy research at the Brookings Institution.
Yeah, and I'll just say that it was sort of an accident. I never planned to enter into tech policy and privacy research. So I guess I took an internship with the government relations department of VMware, which is a cloud computing and cybersecurity company. And I was a political science and Spanish major, and I wanted to learn about government relations, so how private corporations interact with the government and advocate for their interests. But I think I found I sort of fell in love with the policy issues themselves. VMware does a lot of work on issues like how Congress and federal agencies create rules around privacy, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. So I knew that I wanted to keep working in these issues. And that's how I guess a couple of internships and fellowships later found myself at Brookings. Now I work on technology policy issues for a think tank, and I really love it. It's a great fit for me. But in short, my path to Brookings definitely wasn't linear. I think 5 years ago, I had no idea I would be working at a think tank. But I think my main philosophy has always been to find work and find opportunities that you're passionate about. And I think that just led me to where I am now.
Great, yeah. And again, like quickly for Yi, what types of jobs and roles are available in the industry with building voice assistants?
Sure. So if you, we have worked with many companies. If you look at any virtual assistant project, there are quite several different stakeholders in the project. And those behind those are jobs related, right? If a company wants to launch a virtual assistant, usually there are internal stakeholders, like the whole project team could have a project manager, manage the project progress and so on. There, one very key person is the one or two or more designer for the project, for the virtual assistant, design the persona, behavior, conversation, and so on. And there are also system integrators, AI engineers in the project. Integrators build backend integration, empower virtual assistant to access data, and so on. And AI engineer help do some training. And there are also business sponsors in the company, like executives, senior managers sponsor the project. Then IT staff, there are also procurement team involved, and legal team are also involved in the project. And there are also external technology vendors, like companies like Rulai is the actual technology vendor. And there are also consulting companies might help support the design and integration, like the Deloitte, those consulting companies. Of course, there are also users for virtual assistant. So I think for each student, based on your interest, you can contribute and get involved into virtual assistant projects in very different ways. And there are quite some job opportunities.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for both your time today and for all you listening. I believe there will be a networking session from 4 to 6 if you have more questions, but I'll hand it off to the next speaker panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your time.